And welcome everybody, my name is Ursa and this is my tier list for all of the leaders in Civilization 7. There are some background rules and assumptions you need to know alongside this list. I'm going to leave them on the screen for you to have a look at, so feel free to pause if you like, but I think the easiest way to do this is to just jump straight in. At the beginning, Ada Lovelace. Ada is a cultural scientific leader whose ability comes in two parts. The second part is the easiest to talk about because, to be honest with you, it's not very good. Gaining culture equal to 50% of your total science per turn when you complete a technology mastery is not something that gives you a huge amount of culture. In the average age, the most you're ever going to get from this is about 4 turns worth of science converted into culture, which over the course of about 100 turns really doesn't make a huge difference. Her main ability is the top half. Cities receive 2 science per age when you complete a civic mastery. Now, some ages have more civic masteries than others, but you normally will be able to get about 5 of these. On paper, this ability is strong. The more cities you have, the better. The more civic masteries you have, the better. The problem with this ability is that it takes a little bit of time to get going. 2 science per age sounds really good, but if you have to wait 20 to 30 turns to get your first mastery, it takes a little bit of time to get online. And compared to other science abilities, like for instance Confucius, it doesn't represent a lot. It also has a little bit of a bad part in the sense that it resets at the start of each age. By the time you get to the latter stages of exploration and modern, when you can pretty much print cities as much as you'd like, the science per turn becomes obsolete. And at the beginning of the age, it's not really enough to get too excited about. However, it is a decent amount of science somewhere in the middle. For that reason, for me, Ada is a B tier leader. Her abilities are useful, they're fairly consistent, but they're not going to break the game wide open. Amina is a leader that suffers a little bit from a lack of clear direction. +1 resource capacity in cities is sometimes helpful, but to be honest with you, in the early stages of the game, camels, lighthouses, and bazaars make this fairly obsolete, and in the late stages of the game, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. 5 combat strength on all units on plains and desert really transpires to be a very limited conquering tool. +5 combat strength is a huge amount, but it is limited to very small parts of the map, and the problem with plains and desert is often it can be mixed up with other types of terrain, so it's not consistently able to be used. More so, it's a defensive tool because you're likely to have your combat strength in your own initial capital because that's likely to be on plains and desert. 1 gold per age for each resource assigned to cities, again, is something that comes in nice and early. It can give a nice tiny chunk of gold, but it becomes obsolete incredibly quickly. It is not a lot of gold. Welcome at the beginning of the game for a bit of momentum, but if we compare it, for instance, to Isabella's gold rush, or the gold you can get in a lot of the different mementos, it doesn't add up to much. If any of those abilities were a little stronger, or her abilities sync together a little better, I think I'd put Amina higher, but for me, she currently ranks as a C tier leader. World Conqueror Ashoka, the first of 2 forms of Ashoka, again has a split ability. The productive element of it is fairly interesting. 1 production for every 5 excess happiness in cities can become quite a lot if you really focus on the happiness. 10% production in settlements not founded by you is something that can multiply later in the game into something relatively useful, but again, 10% production is not the biggest amount. Declaring a formal war granting a celebration is niche but helpful for those first few turns of the war, although you're likely to have a lot of happiness anyway. It then stacks with the 5 combat strength against districts for all units during a celebration. So when are these abilities helpful? Early game, this pretty much gives you 1 extra production if you settle on water, so that's already looking good. And with the right civ, this can produce a decent chunk of production. 5 combat strength against districts is one of the few abilities in the game that actually increases your combat strength for siege units and cavalry units against walls, and is incredibly powerful. Now, this used to be +10. It was nerfed because it was incredibly strong. And for me, that is why I'm putting Ashoka as an A tier leader rather than an S tier leader. That production kicks in early, it scales well through the game, but the combat strength makes him one of the more able conquerors, and you're even rewarded with more production as you conquer more. Ashoka World Renouncer, however, especially after the food patch, is consistently stronger for a couple of reasons. Food in cities for every 5 excess happiness, again, is something that can be scaled fairly easily and helps your cities to grow in the early stages of the game. Towards the end of the game, when your cities can easily be rocking a couple of hundred happiness, that's a lot of extra food. 10% food in all settlements during a celebration is one of those empire-wide bonuses that really helps. All of your towns will funnel more food into your cities, so you will see more than a 10% boost. And the population you can achieve with Ashoka is fairly astronomical. However, this ability is very powerful indeed. All buildings gain a 1 happiness adjacency for improvements. Simply surround a building with a few improvements and you can easily get anywhere from a +2 to a +5 happiness adjacency. It's even better than that because that adjacency is also multiplied by 1.5 times for every specialist on the building. And both buildings on a single tile get it. So if there are 4 improvements around a quarter and there are 2 buildings in that quarter, you have 8 happiness adjacency on the quarter and you get 4 extra for every specialist. For this reason, Ashoka is one of the happiest leaders in the game, which means he will be constantly celebrating with tons and tons of food and infinite use of specialists. So not only is World Renouncer Ashoka's abilities easy to use, but they are consistent and powerful. For me, an S-tier leader. Now to everyone's favorite blonde boy, Augustus, who gets 2 production in the capital for every town. He can also purchase culture buildings in towns, such as monuments and amphitheaters, and also culture unique buildings as well. And he also gets 50% gold towards purchasing buildings in towns. Augustus is the town specialist. The more of them you have, the better. Now, Augustus takes a little bit of practice, but if you get the hang of him, he is incredibly powerful. 2 production in the capital for every town, to be honest with you, is not the biggest amount, but it kicks in early. Personally, I would like to see that as 2 production per age, but 2 production in the capital does make a difference in antiquity when you can easily be taking anywhere between 12 and 20 extra production for your wonders. Culture buildings and towns mean you can monument spam. And in the case of any civilization with a culture unique building, you can buy as many of them as you like. Your towns are incredibly powerful and Augustus can produce culture like no one else. But his secret power is for 50% gold. This makes any building in towns cheaper. Granaries, sawmills, stone pits, they are all cheaper, which means your towns come online far faster, they grow quicker, and when you convert them into cities, you have often saved quite a bit of gold. Augustus does take a little bit of practice. However, if you can focus on using him correctly, he is easily an S-tier leader. Now to Benjamin Franklin, a very interesting leader in the way that all of his abilities sync together very nicely. 50% production towards constructing production buildings mean that it's easier to use your production to make production. Anyone who plays any 4X game knows that that's the sort of cycle we like to get behind. Plus, your production buildings give you 1 science per age. Remember, that is only if the production building is relevant in the age. Once you move into the next stage, often they become obsolete and you lose that science. You also get a little bit more science from active endeavors that you either start or support, and you can have 2 of the same endeavors at the same time. Now, Franklin has a little bit of an early game rush, which is quite powerful. You can easily start 2 scientific endeavors with people at the beginning of the game and get extra science from them, which means he can catapult through the early tree fast at the cost of using all of your influence, which would normally be spent either supporting other people's actions or suzeraining city-states. Production buildings also kick in later into the age than you would like. The science is welcome, and he is incredibly powerful, but those abilities, they never quite give you as much as you think they're going to. Franklin's real strength is that early age momentum. He can kick into gear really quickly using his endeavors, and so by the time they are obsolete, his other abilities have kicked in to really give your empire some fun. It's tempting to put Franklin in S tier, but if I look at other S tier leaders, for me, he doesn't quite stand up to them. I'm going to put him in A tier. His strength is in the early age momentum. Later into ages, his abilities fall away a little bit, but he is very powerful. Catherine the Great gives you culture per age on displayed great works. Buildings with great work slots also have an additional slot, which is incredibly useful in antiquity when you're trying to build libraries. Cities settled in tundra Tundra gain science equal to 25% of their culture per turn. If you are willing to stack codices, create relics with your religion, and hunt down artifacts, the culture accumulation can be quite a lot. However, all of those great works take a little bit of time to kick in. If you settle your cities outside of Tundra, you also don't get the science. For that reason, she can be a little bit slow to deploy in an age, and a little bit limiting in terms of where she can settle on the map. It is worth pointing out, however, that cultural scientific in the early age is one of the best combinations of endeavors to have. Having both of those available means that you can push through the tech and civic trees quite quickly. For me, though, it's the map reliance and the slow speed of which it takes to get relics online that holds her back. If she was a little bit more consistent or a little bit quicker to deploy in an age, I would put her in the A tier, but for me, she's a B tier leader alongside Ada. Charlemagne is a leader that looks weaker on paper than he actually is. Military and science buildings receive happiness adjacency from quarters. Just like Ashoka, that happiness adjacency does count towards specialist adjacency and can be multiplied further as you go through the game. This basically means that Charlemagne always makes a ridiculous amount of happiness if you build military and science buildings, which in most playthroughs you will be, but he really shines in the second half of his ability. Once you have unlocked a cavalry unit, you gain 2 free cavalry units every time you hit a celebration. Those start as chariots and by the end of the game are deployed as tanks. They also have 5 combat strength during a celebration. Now, cavalry units are already the strongest in the game. They have the highest combat strength out of any unit, and whilst the recent patch took out their double combat strength against infantry units, they remain the highest combat strength in the game. 5 combat strength on top of that makes them absolute wrecking balls. And the fact is, if you build your economy, if you build military buildings, if you build science buildings, you will have the happiness to stay in celebrations all the time, and you'll be generating units so fast that you will always have an army, and you don't have to build one. It just appears for you. Charlemagne is up there with one of the stronger military units in the game. As a leader, he is incredibly powerful. For me, I am torn between putting Charlemagne in the S tier and the A tier. The only thing that puts him in the A tier for me is the speed in which he gets going in the beginning of the game. Until you unlock the chariot, you do not get 3 units, and until you have unlocked your military and science buildings, you do not receive any adjacencies. So comparing him to the S tier leaders, these abilities kick in from turn 1, or at least it does for Ashoka. Charlemagne takes a little bit of time to get going, but once he is going, he is a juggernaut. Confucius is a beautifully easy leader to understand. 25% growth rate in cities effectively means 25% extra food. 2 science on specialists ups the default specialist yield from 2 science, 2 culture to 4 science and 2 culture. Confucius is incredibly easy to use. You will want to build cities anyway. They will have more population, and with more population you will have more specialists, and with more specialists you will have more science. Now, unfortunately, Confucius has no ability to boost your economy, your culture, or any form of your other yield generations, but extra specialists and extra science from them means he is an incredibly effective leader. He also pretty much guarantees that you will get full points in exploration age from having 40 yields in a district, because that 2 science counts. Now, Confucius used to be bugged. It was possible to bring the growth rate up so high in cities that they required 0 food to grow. That is now no longer the case, but his ability still remains incredibly effective. When I compare Confucius to other leaders around him, such as Ben Franklin, Ada Lovelace, for me, he ranks up with the A tier. Effective, easy to use, scales well into the late game. Next, Baroque Friedrich, who just received a bit of a buff. He gains a great work every time he captures a settlement, so either a codice, a relic, or an artifact, depending on the age. He now gains 1 culture per age on displayed great works, and he gains an infantry unit when he completes either a civic mastery or a culture building. Friedrich is one of those leaders who has a lot of abilities that do a little bit, and for me, just don't really combine into something that is effective. Capturing settlements is not a reliable way of generating great work. Sure, it can be useful, but it's never going to change a game for you. The culture per age on displayed great works isn't as strong as Catherine's, and gaining an infantry unit is nice, but they're not as strong as cavalry units, and they don't appear as quickly as Charlemagne's ability. Even with civic mastery masteries, you're likely to have maximum 5 in an age, and culture buildings can be a little bit difficult to build if you're focused on an economy or war. It's also worth pointing out that even though he is a military leader and can start a war endeavor to give him a little bit of combat strength, he has no actual ability to help him do the conquering. I find this version of Friedrich to be a little bit disjointed, and I will put him down in the D tier. I like him. I think he's fun. I think he's an interesting leader to use, but he doesn't stack up with the others. He's neither as consistent to use as Catherine in the culture department or as reliable to use as Charlemagne or Ashoka in the war department. My opinion changes when you look at the second version of him, Oblique Friedrich. The infantry units still flood in, this time when you complete a technology mastery or construct a science building. Definitely easier to do in the beginning of the game because there are more technology masteries and science buildings tend to be nicely rushable in every age, especially if you are going to war because all of the combat strength lives in the science tree. There's no point rushing culture if you want to unlock stronger units, although there are some civics that do help you. Science and war is easily the better combination. His strength, however, lies in the top half of his ability. Army commanders start with the merit commendation, granting them +1 command radius. This is the second strongest commendation in the game. 2 range on your commanders means that Friedrich syncs up so well with so many strategies, and for him it's very easy to very quickly and early on in the game achieve commanders with the order commendation, giving all troops +5 combat strength, and also merit, meaning the commanders hit a greater range of the battlefield than anyone else. Friedrich takes a little bit of getting to know. You have to learn to use commanders properly, you have to learn to level them up, and you have to learn to balance your economy with your war. However, if you focus on getting science buildings and completing technology masteries, which you will do anyway, Friedrich generates an army and has a stronger army than anyone else. For me, this version of Friedrich is one of the strongest military leaders in the game, and the synergies you can get with civilizations like Bulgaria, Buganda, Prussia, Persia, Rome, the list goes on. He is by far the superior version. Harriet Tubman lives on in both our hearts and our brains. In our hearts, she is the eternal spy capable of lumping large amounts of war support on anybody that dares to attack you. In our heads, she also gains a lot of influence towards initiating espionage actions. Now, 5 war support on all wars declared against you can absolutely trivialize any deity bonuses the AI has, because 5 combat strength is a huge swing, capable of eliminating most of the 8 combat strength deity bonus. It also gives a huge penalty to the happiness and economy of anyone declaring war on you. It is, however, slightly unreliable. If nobody attacks you, you never gain a benefit. If you want to attack somebody, you don't get the benefit either. Espionage, unfortunately, has been nerfed into the ground in one of the recent patches. It now takes longer and has more of a penalty, although Tubman remains incredibly skilled at it. Units ignoring vegetation is useful, but not game-changing. She does remain, however, the safest pair of hands to play deity on. Nobody in their right mind would attack you, and when the AI does choose to do so, with a little bit of stacking, you can have such a large combat bonus that you never suffer from being at war, saving you vital influence to use on other things. If espionage remained better, I would rate her higher. For me, she remains in the B tier. She does remain, however, one of the most fun leaders to play because you can have builds that have insane war support. However, influence in the later stages of the game, especially with hub towns, does trivialize this part of her ability slightly. Hatshepsut is a leader that recently got buffed and is a leader that I really want to love but just can't quite get on board with. 1 culture per age for every unique resource. Now, this is quite a good ability at the beginning of the game. It's fairly easy to get 3 or 4 resources into your initial capital and first town or 2. When you send trade routes as well, this can give you more, but there are only so many resources and this bonus will only give you so much culture. Somewhere between about 10 and 15 culture per age if you push it. It comes in early, but it's not very powerful. 15% production towards buildings and wonders and cities adjacent to navigable rivers is useful, especially in wonder builds. There are very few production bonuses towards wonders in the game, and it should be stated that Hatshepsut can get incredibly large production amounts if you have a lot of production. However, a percentage bonus on something very small can easily get outweighed by another fixed production bonus, for instance like Augustus. You're also reliant on settling near navigable rivers, which can be incredibly difficult given the map's inconsistency with spawning them. She remains useful and interesting, getting early game culture to unlock wonders and then extra production towards building them. But for me, those bonuses don't stack up into anything particularly powerful. She remains C tier. Better than Friedrich, but not by much. Now to Himiko, who has two variations. This is High Shaman. Again, a variation that recently got boosted. 2 happiness per age in happiness and influence buildings, doubled if a building is both. Think of a villa that gives happiness and influence. She also gains a 50% production bonus towards constructing same buildings. And finally, 20% bonus culture, albeit with a minus 10% science penalty across your entire empire, with those effects being doubled while in a celebration. Now, Himiko High Shaman was an interesting one for me. The boost came in because the developers felt that she needed more of an ability boost to make her competitive. I originally thought she was up there with one of the strongest leaders of the game before this boost. Now, the fact that things like monuments get built faster, that is an influence building, and they now give happiness, and you can build them giving yourself a massive culture boost. She is both a leader that works in the early game and scales insanely well into the late game. She is a leader that you have to play to really understand how powerful she is. That is a massive production boost. It is a huge extra happiness gain, and most of the game you will be running 40% extra culture. Sure, the science penalty does sting, but if you use her as a cultural leader, she is incredibly powerful. For me, it's not even close. She is an S tier leader. Her second variation, Queen of War, is an interesting one. She gains a unique endeavor called Friend of Way that can be performed in an alliance to grant you and your ally 25% extra science. She also gains science per age for every leader you are friendly or helpful with, and she can support endeavors for 3. Himiko is an incredibly unreliable leader in this variation. She ranges from being infinitely strong to very disappointing, depending on how the dice rolls with how the AI treats you in the middle of the game. Sometimes the AI just doesn't play ball. It denounces you, it goes to war with you, it forward settles you, it does everything it can to detract from having a positive relation. So there are games where the AI gives you 0 endeavors. There was not one single leader that is friendly or helpful with you because of the way that the AI chains up its wars. It allies itself, one declares war on you, then someone else does, then somebody else does, and from that point of the game, they all hate you. And there are some games where gaining an alliance with anybody is impossible. However, in those games that do work, supporting endeavors for 3 is exceptional. It gives you large amounts of admittedly random and varied yields. They can sometimes be science or culture, but other times war support, happiness, even food. The extra science comes in very early because friendly greetings can be made quite early on to keep people happy. And if you can pull off 25% science, Himiko is one of the strongest science leaders in the game. I can't put Himiko down as an S tier leader because in this form, she is not reliable enough for me to make that grade, but I can comfortably put her as an A tier leader. In the games where everything goes right for you, she's easily S tier. In the games where it doesn't go right for you, probably C or D, and I'm going to average her out as A because I think with a little bit of manipulation, the AI generally does play ball a bit. Ibn Battuta is one of those leaders that I would strongly recommend trying once you've played your first couple of games because he is incredibly versatile. 2 wildcard attribute points after the first civic in every age means that across the game you will have 6 extra attribute points. +1 sight for all units means you reveal the map quicker than anybody else, and an endeavor that lets you trade maps with people sounds good, but to be honest with you, costs quite a lot of influence and doesn't really reveal as much of the map as you would like it to. Scouts with Ibn Battuta really do reveal the map very quickly. It means you can find those goodie huts, it means you can find the city-states and the settling spots very quickly. It also means in exploration your boats have a lot of extra help finding land and finding treasure. But the main strength is those 2 wildcard attribute points. Depending on how you use them, you can give yourself very early generic gains such as plopping in the science, economic or culture trees to gain 1 of each yield in a city, or each settlement I should say, or if you save them, you can use his attribute points to beeline down a tree. In the early game, for instance, going down the diplomacy tree to give you extra influence towards city-states, or the culture tree to gain production towards wonders equal to Hatshepsut's ability. Or even just focusing on a single tree all game can lead you incredibly far down into the repeatables. It takes practice, but Ibn Battuta is one of those leaders that can be incredibly optimized if you have a strategy and stick to it, and he is incredibly versatile in how he goes about his game. It's that versatility and easy to use power that for me puts him in the A tier. I don't think he is as strong as the S tier leaders. He constantly ranks up there with some of the strongest in the game if you know what you're doing. Isabella is a meme leader, and I mean that in the possible most fantastic way that I can portray. I love Isabella. 300 gold every time you discover a natural wonder, doubled if it's in distant lands, and 100% extra tile yields from natural wonders mean you want to find the natural wonders and you want to settle near them as quickly as you can. Now, if those were the only abilities, Isabella would easily be amongst the lowest tiered leaders in the game because there are simply not enough natural wonders in any map, even the large maps, for the gold to matter, or for the tile yields to stack up into something good. Where the ability really comes in is using those abilities in adjacency with the fact that Isabella has a natural wonder start, possibly the only person in the game to do so. The whole point of Isabella is the fact that you start next to a natural wonder, and you use those yields to catapult your first settlement through the game quickly, giving yourself, depending on the natural wonder that you have, infinite food, production, gold, culture, or happiness. Sometimes it takes a little bit of re-rolling, but you know your capital is going to be incredibly powered. She's also part of the mastery of speedrunning because the starts you get that are good are incredibly good. That, however, is the problem with Isabella. Isabella is deeply inconsistent. Natural wonders, well, they range from being fantastic to utterly rubbish, and you only really get those benefits from one city. She's a tempo leader. If you can ride that first natural wonder through the early stages of the game, you can catapult yourself into incredibly strong positions later. But if you miss out on that early game flop, well, there's nothing for you. It's worth pointing out that the 50% gold towards purchasing naval units and the reduction in maintenance is useful, but to be honest, most games you will get very limited benefit to those. Some Isabella starts rank up there with S tier. However, if you miss that early game natural wonder start, or the natural wonder isn't very good, she easily becomes D tier. I am averaging that out on consistency alone to put Isabella into the C tier, and I know that's controversial because it is easy to make an argument that with the right seed, she's amongst the best leaders in the game. I am not doubting that at all. But for me, a highly ranked leader has to be consistent, and Isabella for me is not consistent. Hilariously fun. If this was a tier list based on fun, she would top it. But for me, a C tier leader. Jose Rizal, or the Rizzler. Again, a leader that received a buff. When gaining rewards from a narrative event, gain an additional 20 culture, gold, and influence per age. He also has additional narrative events. He gets 50% celebration duration and 50% happiness towards celebrations. Now, Rizal for me is an incredibly interesting leader because he can gain very quick early game momentum, especially if you get some early game narrative events that push you through the civic tree, economically through your first couple of buildings, and giving you the influence to start up some interesting endeavors or even support other people's. That early game momentum is fairly reliable and it is incredibly powerful. However, whilst 50% happiness towards celebrations can be really useful, 50% celebration duration is a bit of a two-edged sword. It means you will always be celebrating, and I do mean pretty much consistently throughout the game. If you play Rizal right, you will always be in a celebration, which means you always have the celebration boost. That in itself is very strong. However, the duration increase means that you actually hit celebrations less often, and that means your government can sometimes be a little bit smaller. That for me is why Rizal is an A tier leader rather than an S tier. Not having celebrations appear very quickly does limit the size of your government, and that can actually reduce the yields that you get across your regular civics and your civilization civics. Traditions and social policies are there to be used, and he often gets less than anybody else, but there is no denying he gets very strong early game momentum. It's worth pointing out though, that in the modern age, age, often those events can be few and far between. It's the early game momentum that really pushes him into A tier. Lafayette, previously one of my favorite leaders in the game, he unfortunately was nerfed in a previous patch. He gains a unique endeavor called Reform, which grants an additional social policy slot, albeit being very, very expensive to use. It can also give the other player a social policy slot as well if they support it, but we don't really care about that. One combat strength for every tradition, but not policy slotted in the government, is something in the Antiquity age that can start at about 3 combat strength, maybe 4, but by modern can easily give you yields of maybe +8 to +10 if you're willing to stack all of the tradition cards that you have unlocked through the game. The nerf came in at the 1 culture and happiness per age and settlements doubled in distant lands. This is a bonus that kicks in right at the beginning of the game, but unfortunately was halved from its previous iteration of 2 culture and happiness. Lafayette is consistent. Lafayette is incredibly strong. That extra culture and happiness applies to every settlement in your empire and just works. Doubling in distant lands also gives you more yields, and the combat strength applies to every single unit type wherever it is on the map, regardless of whether you are in attack or defense. To be honest, the Reform endeavor, it is useful in some situations, but there are normally better things that you would be using your influence on. For me, Lafayette used to be an A tier leader. The combat strength was so reliable, and the culture and happiness helped you to dominate the early game, but that penalty means that his bonuses really do fall away a little bit compared to other people's, and for that reason I'm putting it in B tier. Now personally, I really like him as a leader. I still find him incredibly fun to use, but I feel like the nerf probably hit him a little bit too hard, and whilst he's still usable, there are better people at war, and there are better people for happiness and culture, especially if you look at some of the leaders above him on the tier list. Machiavelli is an early game tempo leader. 3 influence per age is only really useful in Antiquity. By exploration and modern, that becomes irrelevant. 50 gold per age when your diplomatic action proposals are accepted, or 100 gold if they're rejected, mean that you can, in the early stages of the game, afford things like settlers, granaries, armed units. Just by offering the AI things, you know that it'll get refused. No relationship requirements for formal wars means that you save influence, and levying troops from city-states currently is a useless ability given the cost of influence that you need to use to levy a single troop. It's just far too high at the moment to be usable. Machiavelli can generate a lot of early game gold. Offer open borders to someone that hates you, they will give you 100 gold. Repeat across everybody and you can easily make 300 to 500 gold every 10 turns or so. It's very powerful. The influence per age also helps you to befriend city-states and keep yourself safe in wars. The problem with Machiavelli is every single one of his abilities becomes obsolete by the time you hit the late game Antiquity, and to be honest with you, if your economy is benefiting from that gold in exploration, then something's wrong with your economy. The numbers just pale away into insignificance. For me, that's why Machiavelli is a B tier leader. Very fun at rushing the early game, but the cost to using all of his abilities is that everyone hates you, and when the AI all hates you, well, they're more likely to generate allies, they're more willing to go into group wars against you. He really is a double-edged sword in that manner. If his ability scaled better later into the game, I'd rate him higher. For now, this schema stays in B tier. The first of 2 versions of Napoleon now, Emperor Napoleon. I'm just gonna come out and flat out say it. I think Emperor Napoleon is rubbish. A unique sanction called Continental System that reduces the trade route limit of the targeted leader to all other leaders by 1. It causes a massive relationship penalty and costs more to reject. Effectively, choose 1 person at a time and make their life a living hell. You also gain 8 gold per age for every leader you are unfriendly or hostile with, and you can reject endeavors for 3, although you won't need to do this very often, because once you reject 1, no one will offer you anything after that point. Now, the idea behind Emperor Napoleon is he is supposed to come into his own power when everybody else in the game hates you. You don't need to trade with anybody, you can stop them trading with anyone but you, but here are the problems. 8 gold per age becomes very insignificant very quickly. It is not worth, in any shape of the imagination, taking this gold in order to have a negative relation with the AI. It's way better to be friendly with people. Endeavors mean more. Alliance yields mean more. Not having people people declare war on you, it's worth much more than 8 gold per age. And Continental System is incredibly expensive to use in terms of influence. That, and it applies only to one civilization at a time. Yes, decreasing trade route limit is fun, but it doesn't stop trade routes that are already in existence, and it can be circumvented by just spending influence to expand your trade routes anyway. On paper, Emperor Napoleon looks like ridiculous fun. In reality though, his abilities need a massive boost to become anywhere near competitive with any other leader. Revolutionary Napoleon is better, albeit not much better. 2-part ability, defeating an enemy unit provides culture equal to 50% of its combat strength. This is not a large amount of culture. It really isn't. Early game antiquity units have anywhere between 10 and 30 combat strength. Gaining 5 to 15 culture on killing a unit is so negligible, it will very, very rarely even move the little dial that shows you how far round the culture civic you have unlocked. It just won't even move it. Like, look at this circle where you can see my XP around Napoleon. If we're in game and that's the civic, you won't even see it budge. It's a tiny amount of culture. This needs to be increased massively. By itself, this is easily a D tier ability. +1 movement for all land units is a little bit more interesting because this is all land units. Infantry units, siege units, cavalry units, ranged units, they all get the movement bonus, but also things like missionaries, merchants, settlers. Any land unit gains this boost, including commanders. It makes redeploying units much faster. It means if you are in a nice open field of terrain, your units can easily flank. So there are useful uses for this ability. The problem is the way that movement is calculated in Civ 7. Rough terrain of any type ends movement. It doesn't matter whether or not you have 2 movement or 7, it simply ends it. So in order to get movement benefits from an ability like this, either you need to be traveling on nice open terrain, or you need to be traveling on an established road. This is one of the reasons why this ability is not as useful as you would think it was. Really, it's just used for redeploying and moving scouts around. It's also worth bearing in mind that both of these forms of Napoleon have absolutely no combat strength boost at all. Revolutionary Napoleon is a military leader, but he gains no combat bonuses. How are you going to defeat units if you don't have any extra strength? It's a bit of a head scratcher. I believe this version of Napoleon is better than the other version, but it's still not very good. His abilities need a serious buff in order to be usable, in any way more than what is effectively a small quality of life increase. Pachacuti recently got boosted by 2 adjacent patches. Firstly, food was made a lot more powerful, and secondly, he now has an ability called Cities gain a bonus to production equal to 10% of that city's food, effectively converting any food in the city into production. All buildings receive a food adjacency for mountains. Remember that this adjacency is also boosted by specialists, and specialists adjacent to mountains pay no happiness maintenance. There are some really bad things about Pachacuti, and mainly, the first bad thing is the availability of mountains. For whatever reason, in most pairings of civilization, Pachacuti rarely reliably starts next to mountains. You will have to do some re-rolling. It's also quite often the case that even if your capital gets mountains, there won't be many mountains left for your other cities. He also has pretty much no bonus for any specialist outside of a mountain city, so he is incredibly map dependent. There are some good things, however. Combining a lack of happiness and food on specialists by multiplying the building adjacency means that your mountain cities can become incredibly powerful and can have a lot of specialists. Pachacuti is one of the best leaders at generating big, meaty cities with a lot of specialists. It's also worth bearing in mind that 10% production based on a city's food at the beginning of the game will be entirely negligible. However, once towns begin to get linked up, towards the latter stages of an age, that production boost can become worth a lot of production. It is not a game-changing amount of production. It is not a game-breaking amount of production, but it is welcome, and it gives him a bonus that reliably is put across the map regardless of whether or not that city has a mountain range in it, and that is a welcome thing for Pachacuti. I believe that the specialists are not quite as powerful as specialists owned defined by people like Ashoka or Confucius or Charlemagne. I also don't believe the production bonuses are as consistent as others. So because of his map dependency, for me, he will remain a B tier leader. But on the right start, he could easily push into A or possibly even S tier. For me, it's just a case of balancing those early game abilities with things that scale into the later game. If I look around at other B tier leaders, this feels just about right. Simon Bolivar is one of the newest military leaders. 1-3 war support on all wars applies to both offensive and defensive wars. It's a small bonus, but a useful one. When you conquer a settlement for the first time, the settlement can purchase one constructible building for free. Unrest does also not prevent purchasing. Now on paper, Bolivar isn't incredibly strong. +1 war support is not going to make much of a difference in any offensive or defensive wars. At best, it just helps you to not take a happiness penalty if you're lacking influence, and at worst, it doesn't really give you enough military strength to do anything useful. The skill of Bolivar is in the subtlety, however. 1-3 purchasable building is something that can be incredibly useful if you have very expensive buildings. If you use it on something like a granary, it's not going to do much for you. If you use it in the late game, however, for something like a rail station, a port, or even a factory, conquering can lead to some very silly things. Unrest not preventing purchasing also means that you can pillage anything in a settlement for some obscene yield, especially if you're playing someone like Bulgaria. And because you can still purchase whilst you are in unrest, you can then repair everything immediately on conquering a settlement, meaning those yields come back into your empire. You have to get used to using him, but those abilities can lead to some rather fun and spicy combinations. For me, I don't believe his abilities rank up with others in terms of power. He's a C tier leader for me, but his abilities do show a lot more promise than a lot of the D tier leaders. I feel that with a little bit more war support, or with a little bit of gold discount on purchasing things in towns like Augustus, he would rank up. But for now, his consistently relies on you conquering, and that can be quite difficult to do reliably. Now to Tecumseh, and I'm just gonna come out with it right now. For me, Tecumseh is absolutely the strongest leader in Civilization 7 right now, purely because of the way he scales. Antiquity is the hardest age because he doesn't have many abilities that come online very quickly. All settlements gain 1 food and 1 production per age for every city-state you are suzerain of. He gains no bonuses to influence, so becoming city-state can be tricky in the early stages of the game. However, in exploration and modern, to be honest with you, becoming suzerain with every single city-state is a trivial matter, especially if you know how to set up influence farming hub towns. The food and production applies to every single settlement. If you have upwards of 10 to 20 settlements, the numbers you gain are obscene. Your cities gain so much production, you can out-militarily build anybody, you can build any building faster, and you can become the fastest producers of wonders in the game by far. You have higher populations, and you also have more specialists, because not only do the cities gain food, but also your towns do, and that food is then funneled in via specialized towns back into your cities, effectively giving you a double bite. But it gets even better because the production in towns is then converted into gold. So Tecumseh is also one of the strongest gold generators in the game. And that's not even the best bit. 1 combat strength for all units in every city-state is insanely powerful. In exploration and modern, you will not struggle with practice to have at least 8 city-state suzerain, maybe up to the full 16 if you're playing on a standard map, depending on the spawn and the availability. When you combine that with the fact that military city-states double up this bonus, which you will have to claim if you are suzerain them, it can be very, very easy to take the combat strength bonus for all units in attack and defense of all types against any target. That strength can go from anywhere from +10 to easily +25 to 30. Your units will become indestructible. You will take no damage. Nobody can stop you. Currently, the upper limit of Tecumseh's power is infinite. He is by far the most powerful leader in civilization, and it's not even close. Trung Trac for me is a leader that looks really good on paper, but isn't quite as good in practice. 3 levels on your first army commander is a welcome early game boost. It effectively means you only have a single level to your first commendation. If you want to take order for +5 combat strength, fantastic. You could even go for merit for the +1 range. 20% commander experience also means that all future army commanders level up faster. And getting your army commanders to level 8, 10, or even 12 for 2 or 3 commendations is significantly easier. However, 20% extra XP really isn't very meaningful and often will only be, at best, 1 extra promotion compared to somebody else, given the fact that promotions get more expensive as you go through. 10% science in cities and tropical sounds like a lot, especially if you double it whilst in a formal war you declare. That's 20% extra science in cities. However, a lot of science that you generate on your headline number at the top of the game is not city science. The 10 science per turn that you gain on turn 1 is not city science. Science that comes from endeavors is not city science. City science is literally only the yield that city makes, so the number can often be a little smaller than you think, and 20%, whilst effective, is not even enough to really give you the benefit of, say, an extra library. Compared to, say, Confucius or Himiko, Queen of War, it's not the strongest of ability. Now, Trung Trac is nicely synergized, and I do think she has the ability to get some early game momentum with a very powerful commander. But that commander will not be as powerful as Friedrich's. The science benefits are not as strong as some of the other leaders. For me, she is a D tier leader, especially if you consider that only cities in tropical gain the science boost. If you go conquering anywhere else other than the equator, you don't get the bonus. Xerxes comes in 2 forms. The first is King of Kings. 3 extra combat strength for units that are attacking in neutral or enemy territory carries with it a couple of caveats. You do not get this combat strength if you are defending or if you are attacking in your own land. That said, as long as you are attacking in an offensive war, that 3 combat strength is fairly stackable and fairly easy to deploy. 100 culture and gold per age when you capture a settlement for the first time at the beginning of the game can be a meaningful sum of money and can be used to upgrade troops. However, that number really isn't worth the effort of going conquering in the first place. It's a nice amount, but it's really a bit meh. In exploration and modern, you just won't notice it. 10% gold in all settlements, doubled in settlements not founded by you, is a very welcome number. Again, remember, a lot of gold that is generated is not settlement gold, such as endeavor gold, or gold given to you by trade routes. But 10% extra is a welcome amount and scales well through the game. If you deliberately deploy a city in a settlement that you have conquered, that 20% is very strong indeed. However, the real benefit is +1 settlement limit per age. This is very, very strong. The more settlement limit you have, the more powerful you are economically. Every town is worth more resources, more food, more gold, and more map control. It is also easier to get to a lot of legacy paths if you own more settlements. It's easy to go conquering if you can have more settlement limit. No other domination leader has an ability to hold more settlements like Xerxes can. And by the time you hit modern, 3 extra settlement limit is a very meaningful number that can get you quite a few ideology points if you conquer in the right places. I don't think he's the strongest military leader, but certainly for me, he's up there at A tier. Finally, Xerxes the Achaemenid, also recently receiving a buff. +1 trade route limit with all other leaders saves you a very large amount of influence early in the game and actually helps you to make more friends. Every trade route you deploy with an AI gives you a +10 relationship limit, so 2 trade routes is +20. Xerxes finds making alliances incredibly easy. +10 trade range is very useful as well, giving you more options, especially in the early game, to make trade routes. 50 culture and 100 gold per age isn't quite as much as King of Kings gets for conquering, but is actually a more reliable way of generating gold. Especially in the early game, you can use the culture and the gold to rebuy merchants to an extent when you make those merchants in the first place. Simply make a merchant with gold, make a trade route, get gold back, make a new one. His real power, however, comes from the unique buildings and improvements buff of 1 culture and gold per age. Now, this doesn't sound like a huge amount, but this is an ability that stacks. If you have 10 unique unique improvements, say howlets, berets, or other improvements, including unique buildings like in Greece or Rome. +1 gold and culture can be very stackable. As you go through the game, this amount gets higher and higher. Unlike most abilities, however, this culture and gold is ageless because unique buildings and improvements don't go away when you transition from age to age. Anything giving bonuses to buildings or specialists disappear if the building becomes obsolete, aka it's a building attached to one age and you go from that age into another. For Xerxes, however, if you, for instance, have a bunch of unique buildings and improvements that you have improved, they will all remain in the next age and they get more powerful. So at the beginning of an age in exploration and modern, Xerxes, Achaemenid, will often be the biggest producer of culture and gold because all of those yields will remain even more powerful than before. For this reason, it can sometimes be worth ignoring specialists a little bit and focusing more on improvements, but remember, this also applies to towns. You can throw your howlets or other improvements into towns in all stages, and remember that city-states also give you improvements, so it doesn't even matter who you pick. As a civilization, everything works. Change your strategy slightly and have ageless yields that will power you through the culture and the gold through the rest of the game. Xerxes plays a little differently from other leaders, but if you get the hang of him, easily an S-tier leader. Ageless yields are nothing to be ignored. They are very powerful indeed. So that is every leader in Civilization 7 at the moment on build 1.2.1 ordered into my tier list. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment if you think I got it right, if there's anybody you'd shuffle around, or if there's anything you think I've missed. Just remember to read the clarifications that I put up on screen at the beginning of the video. If you don't mind leaving this video a like and the channel a subscription, that would be massively appreciated. I've been Ursa. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.